Hi students, this PowerPoint is meant to build on the background information that you got today in class about our next text Persepolis and to jumpstart the research that you'll be doing starting next week. So let's get started. First thing you need to know is a little bit about the geography of Iran. The location of Iran is in the area of the world called the Middle East, and it borders Iraq here on the west and Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan on the east. In terms of size, this country is about 1/3 the size of the United States. Feel free to stop the screencast if you need to write this stuff down on reading number 3, which is what you need to complete as you're listening to this lecture. A couple of other things that you need to know. So first, there are two important cities that I want you to write down. One, Persepolis, again, the name of our text, and then the other, Tehran, just right here. Tehran is the capital of Iran and it's also the setting of our book. Persepolis is the ancient name for Tehran. So before Tehran was Tehran, it was called Persepolis. If you notice, there are a whole bunch of little moons all over Iran. This indicates that the predominant religion is Islam. And there, as you know, are two sects in Islam. There are the Sunnis, Sunni, and the Shias, Shia. And Iran is predominantly Shia, which is important because the country right next to it, Iraq, during the time that we're going to be studying, was run by a Sunni Muslim, and we'll talk more about that later. You also need to know a little bit about Iran's industry. The main industry that you can see in Iran is oil. So this talks about a lot of the different industries in Iran, but you'll see that there are a lot of oil pipelines all over Iran. And most of the reserves, I want you to notice, are located on the western border with Iraq. Again, that's going to be important because now you know that Iraq and Iran are different in that Iraq is run by Sunnis while Iran is predominantly Shias. And there's some oil, which usually brings a lot of money with it, right on the border between Iraq and Iran. Let's keep going. There are a few key terms that you need to know. They're going to be coming up throughout this presentation. The first is coup d'etat. Coup d'etat is a French word that means a sudden overthrow of a government. So what that is when the government suddenly changes, and it's usually caused by actions of people within the government. A Shah is the title of the king of Iran. So when we say the Shah or Shah Reza, you'll know that we're referring to the king of Iran. An Ayatollah is a high-ranking Shiite or Shia, Shia is the other way to spell that, religious leader. A prime minister is the leader of an elected government. You can think of it like the president. So while we call our elected leader of the country president, England calls their elected leader a prime minister. The West, you're going to hear that a lot, refers to specific countries in the world. It refers to the US and other countries in Western Europe, like Britain. The Middle East, which we talked about earlier, refers to the countries in Southwestern Asia and Northern Africa. So Iran is part of the Middle East. And finally, theocracy. Theocracy is a government run by religious leaders, and that is what Iran became. You also need to know a little bit about key aspects of Iranian culture. So some of the key aspects of Iranian culture is you need to know the language is Persian. Persian resembles Arabic, so some of this might look similar to you if you're taking that elective. And again, the main religion is Islam, and Islam is divided into the Shia Muslims and the Sunni Muslims. And the majority of Iranian Muslims are Shia. And this created problems with Iraq because it was led by a Sunni Muslim. There are a few key players that are going to come up in our study that you need to know about. The first is Reza Shah, and you saw him in the movie. He was the original king who was put in power by the British, and he was Shah or King of Iran from 1925 to 1941. Then there's his son, who you saw also in the video, he took over. His name is Mohammad Reza, but we're going to be calling him the Shah. And he was Shah of Iran from 1941 to 1979, as you saw in the video when he was kicked out. A couple of other key players, the Ayatollah Khomeini, also, we saw him in the video. And he's a high-ranking Shiite, so again, another way to spell Shia, leader who helped kick out the Shah. And he's the main leader in the book that we're reading. Next to him, you see Mohammad Mossadegh. And Mohammad Mossadegh was Prime Minister of Iran. So remember, Prime Minister is like president. So he was democratically elected, who was actually kicked out in a U.S. organized coup d'etat. So remember, a coup d'etat is a sudden overthrow of the government. So you should be noticing he was in power for a little bit and then got kicked out. The final key players are the Guardians of the Revolution. The Guardians of the Revolution are normally regular Iranians who are devoted to implementing religious laws created by the Ayatollah Khomeini. More on them later. But we need to step back and we need to think about some of the key aspects of history that led to the book being written. So the first is the discovery of oil. So as we saw, the key industry in Iran is oil, and oil was discovered there in the 19th century. And this was an opportunity for Iran to make money to sell oil to the West. So you need to know that Iran had oil but needed money, and the West needed oil for industrialization, because during this time, the Industrial Revolution was going on in the West. The West wanted cheap prices. So to ensure control, they put Reza Shah into power to control the oil. You saw this in the video. The result was that there was cheap oil for the West, but not very much profit for Iran, because part of the deal of putting him in power was to give the US cheap prices. In the mid-20th century, Reza Shah, as you saw in the video, left power. And in his place came a new ruler, Mohammad Reza, so Reza Shah's son. And we're going to again call him the Shah. His goal was to modernize Iran. To modernize means to make modern, to bring up to date. And his method for doing so was to follow the Western culture. So he wanted to be like the US and like Britain. And he wanted to squash all rebellion. So he didn't want anybody to be opposed to him. The impact of Reza Shah, there were some really positive things that happened. One was that education was expanded, especially for women. So for the first time in Iran, women were encouraged to get higher education. But again, because he wanted to be like the West, he banned the veil. The veil is an article of clothing that women in Iran wore to indicate their religion, that they were Muslim. And because he wanted to be like the West, he didn't want people to look Muslim, so he banned the veil. Another thing is that he grew businesses. So growing businesses means that there's money coming in and out of the country, and that resulted in a new middle class. But there were some problems that came from those changes, because to get everyone on the same page, he made the clergy lose control. And again, when we say clergy, we're referring to Muslim leaders, so the Muslim religious leaders. He muffled the press. Muffled means to quiet them down. So remember how he wanted to squash any rebellion? He didn't want the press reporting on anything bad that he did. And to keep people in line, anybody who rebelled was arrested. As you can imagine, this did not go over really well with the people of Iran in general. And by the 1950s, Iran was tired of the US influence over the Shah and wanted him out. So the Shah knew he needed to do something to calm the people down. So to calm them down, he appointed this guy, Mohammad Mossadegh, as prime minister. So he was a guy that was not seen as controlled by the West, and he was liked by the people. So he said, look, okay, here's the new president, here's the new leader. And the prime minister made a really controversial decision. He nationalized the oil industry. Nationalize means to put it under government control. Remember how the West had a really good deal with Iran in that they had really cheap prices for oil? Well, when the oil industry got nationalized, that took away control of the oil industry from the West, and the prices for the West went up. So the US didn't like that, and Mohammed Mossadegh is ousted in a coup d'etat. So the West got back in control. This, of course, didn't sit well with the people, so there started to be rebellion against the Shah. And by the 1970s, there were two groups who were fighting against the Shah. There was the educated liberals and the fundamentalist Muslims. The educated liberals didn't like, didn't think that the Shah was doing enough to make the West, or sorry, to make Iran modern. They wanted to be even more modern. And specifically, they wanted democracy. They wanted to be able to have a vote. The fundamentalist Muslims, on the other hand, they thought that the reforms, the changes that the Shah was making went too far. That they went against Islam. Remember how he banned the veil? So they wanted more religious influence. And this led to the Iranian Revolution. To kick out the Shah, the two groups, the fundamentalist Muslims and the educated liberals, they united. And that helped this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, rise to power. When the Ayatollah Khomeini rose to power to become the new leader of Iran, the Shah was exiled, so he was kicked out. And Iran became an Islamic republic, or a theocracy. If you remember from our key terms, that meant that religious leaders had the power. This then resulted in there being no more Western influence because, well, the religious leaders did not like that Western influence. They wanted everybody to be more religious. It also resulted in the Iran and Iraq war because Iraq saw that Iran was going through a revolution. They thought, oh, Iran's a little weak right now. We should take advantage because if you remember, there's lots of oil that's on the border between Iraq and Iran. The Ayatollah Khomeini implemented a lot of changes in laws in Iran. So life changed dramatically for people. Before, the veil was banned. Now the veil was mandatory. Education, you could still get it, but it needed to be religious. And men were expected to dress more conservatively. So uh, they were expected to grow a beard, and they were expected to tuck in their shirts, and they were expected to dress very conservatively. And there was also more restricted lifestyle that meant no drinking, no partying. It was all supposed to be very kind of, you're focused on the religion, and that's all that you will do. Persepolis, the book that we're going to read, is told from the point of view of Marjane Satrapi, who's also the author. And she was a young girl during the Iranian Revolution, so she's describing her experience living through that in the Iran run by the Ayatollah Khomeini. She was also the daughter or the granddaughter of a man imprisoned by the Shah. And it tells the story of Marjane Satrapi's experiences from the ages of 5 to early teens. So I hope that you took down all the notes. Save that paper. We're going to be checking it in class. But it's also really important for you to remember that this paper is the jump start to your own research that you'll be conducting next week.